Hey there viewers, thank you for tuning in to Supermariodiagnostics once again. Today we are working on a 2010 BMW X3 and the customer's concern is that the battery is not charging. It would act up intermittently. One day it would be fine and then other days he would have to jump it and things of that nature. I don't think he mentioned it stalling on the road. One of the other symptoms that it has is that the battery light eventually comes on. I have my maintainer hooked up and we could see that we've got only 11, maybe 12.2. Seems like now it's working. So it's an intermittent issue. We may need to get it hot. I have it kind of cold right now. So once it does act up, I'm gonna jump back on the camera and try to get it on video. I'm just gonna keep it running. And you know what? We're just gonna do some digging real quick. So to do that digging, we're gonna go into all data. It's typically my first grab. If I need to, I'll go to OE, but for now, we're just gonna jump into all data and get a lay of the land, right? Because we don't wanna assume. We're not just gonna jump in and start swapping parts and assume things. And maybe we could come up with a good test plan. And we're gonna go into this charging circuit and take a look at what we're dealing with here. Now I see the alternator has two inputs. One comes from the engine computer and oil condition sensor. It's a violet wire, and then the other wire is our B positive, which also is shared by the starter. That goes to the jump terminal point. That is where my maintainer is hooked up right now. And just so you guys can get a good look at that, that goes to the battery in the back, if I'm not mistaken. I don't see a battery up here, so one thing we can already deduce from this diagram is that there's no way that this is a field wire per se. A field wire would be 12 volts and that's it. 0 to 12 volts depending on how it's designed. But since we have an oil condition sensor here, I'm convinced that this is a communication wire of some sort. It could be a LIN bus, more than likely. Knowing BMW, it's probably going to be a LIN bus, but I think this is before LIN. I'm not sure. Doesn't matter. Point is, we want to see a signal here. We want to see something coming onto the violet, even when it's disconnected. That would tell us that everything up to this connection right here is good. So another thing I want to rule out is voltage drop across these thick wires. And the car started, right? I can already rule something out. This wire right here from the battery positive through the jump start terminal point and the black wire, we can already rule that out as voltage drop because it cranks and it cranked just fine. But we still have to rule out voltage drop here on red, right? And it's dropped to 12.6. And I'm pretty sure this is not a smart system. So if we wanted to see if it was a smart system, we could put the high beams on and see if it jumps up, and it does not. Even though I have my high beams on, you could turn on your defroster, you could load it up, and the smart charger will bring that voltage back up. But I don't think that's what we're dealing with here. So back to my point, we've ruled out, theoretically, due to the way it cranks good. We ruled out voltage drop from the battery to the starter. And then there's a connection from the starter to the alternator that we do have to rule out. So what I think we could do is hopefully access the alternator and run a wire, a big old wire, from the alternator, which is right there, to that jump point and see if our voltage comes back up. And another thing we're gonna have to rule out, which I think theoretically we already did because it started, is a bad ground from the alternator block. From the alternator, which is, hooked up to the engine, through the block to the battery. So I think that's already ruled out because if I'm not mistaken, this only uses one ground for the starter. So the same starter that is for the ground, the same ground that is for the starter is the same ground for the alternator, it's the block. If we had a ground issue, we would have cranking issues. So pretty much we already got a pretty good, decent test plan here. We're getting it to act up. It's at 12.6. 12.6 is not good. And it may be running on the charge of the battery at this time. So at this point, we could just scope pin 1 violet wire here and look for some kind of a communication signal. If that's there, and we run some jumper cables between the alternator and the jump terminal point, we can rule out voltage drop across the thicker B positive wire that is going from the alternator to the starter. So I want to see if I can get this thing to act up a little more, let the voltage drop a little more. I'll get my tools hooked up in the meantime. Really all I'm doing is probing the violet wire and running a redundant wire to our red B positive at the alternator to our jump start terminal point. I'm gonna get that going before this thing gets too hot, and once voltage drops a little more, we'll get this thing back on camera. So a little bit about the setup. We got the scope hooked up, and we also have the scope set up down to our violet wire at the alternator, and the OE plug has a plastic shield around it, and I completely forgot that it's not removable. I tried to remove it, so I could not run that redundant wire. So I had to remove it and install a regular old nut in order to gain access to that stud. So now we'll be able to run that redundant wire. Now, some people might be thinking this is overkill. You know what? It doesn't happen all the time. It acts up when it wants to. We're gonna make sure it's right. And we're not, yeah, maybe somebody might get lucky, throw an alternator in this and fix it, but that's what the customer's paying for testing. We're not guessing, we're not just throwing a part indiscriminately at the vehicle in hopes of fixing it. So we're gonna get this thing to act up and see if we still get a signal. So now the signal that we have here, this is gonna be our known good signal. That is a 0 to 12 volt. Looks exactly like Lin Bus, if I didn't know any better. So that's what we're looking for, and if that drops out in the middle of it all, when it acts up, then we either have a voltage drop issue, which we should be able to see by the voltage dropping a bit, or we should be able to see, we would have to rule out the wiring all the way up to the ECM before we could condemn it. So that's the plan of attack. We're gonna monitor this command here, this Lin Bus actually, and make sure that it doesn't drop out. If it doesn't drop out, we have a redundant power wire and it still acts up, then we know that our alternator is the actual failure. So let's go ahead and get this thing to act up, and we'll get to this back on camera. So we've got a good signal coming to the alternator, and we are at 12.7. Any BMW I've ever seen should have been at 13.5. I'm gonna run my redundant power wire that's coming from the alternator, and we get no improvement. So this alternator must be replaced. Like I said, anybody can get lucky, throw an alternator and fix it. But what if we had a dropout? What if it doesn't charge when you're done? Then what? Who eats that, right? So test, don't guess. We're gonna go ahead and see if we could get an approval for the alternator replacement and show how much it charges at afterwards. I'm convinced that this should be charging at 13.5, but yeah, not a super complicated thing, but it is useful information to know whether this is gonna be a field wire, you know, the 12 volts only, or if it's going to be a Lin Bus like what we see here. So I will leave it at that for now. I think it's still useful information. We're going to post this video, and once we get approval, we'll show after the repair. I'm not really going to show how to do it. I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of videos out there showing how to do this. My brother just finished the job, and we've got a nice 13.85, and it's a confirmed fix. Thank you all for taking the time to watch. I hope you all appreciate this video. for what it's worth, Lin bus, knowing the difference between what you should be expecting just by looking at a diagram. Do your homework before you even look at the car. What if we see, if someone was to stick a multimeter at that Lin bus and see 7 or 8 volts, what will they jump? What kind of conclusion would they jump to, right? So there's all kinds of ways things can go a little south. So that's why I think it's important. We should look up diagrams first, get service information, come up with a test plan, and perform those tests. So that being said, thank you all for taking the time to watch. Hope you all enjoyed this one. I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one.